In my house, I have 9 recessed lights in my kitchen area and only one light switch. On top of that, if you enter the kitchen from the side without the light switch, you're going to have to walk all the way through a dark kitchen before you can turn those lights on. I know, first world problems, right? But I think we can solve this by replacing all of these with these LED lights from Lumary. We can get them connected to Home Assistant, automate them using some motion sensors, and eliminate the need for that light switch altogether. So stick around because we're about to automate some boring stuff. Welcome back to SlackerLabs. My name is Jeff. First off, Lumary sent one of their recessed lighting kits to me so I could do this video. The original plan was to use these LED lights in the other house in an entryway where I had 4 recessed lights, but then we decided to move. And the truth was, I liked these LEDs so much I bought 5 more of them so I could use them in my kitchen. Now, I know some of the details of this project are going to switch people off. But in my smart home, I take an automation-first approach, meaning if I can build a reliable automation that completely eliminates the need for even guests to have to worry about finding light switches, then that's what I'm going to do. And in this case, I think these recessed lights from Lumary are going to be perfect. The Lumary Wi-Fi Smart Recessed Lighting Fixtures come in both a 4-inch and a 5 to 6-inch version. And adding them to your smart home is as easy as changing a light bulb. They are RGBW, providing 16 million colors at up to 1100 lumens. And for those looking to add some color to their home without the trouble of a smart home, you can use the Lumary or the Tuya app to build scenes and enable music mode. Since they're Tuya based, that also means they can be added to your Amazon and Google based smart homes, as well as Home Assistant, making them easy to use as a standalone device, control them via voice command, or automating them with your favorite smart home platform. Like I said, since I only have one light switch in my kitchen, I'm just going to eliminate it altogether. I mean, not actually physically remove the light switch, but remove its purpose and replace it with an automation. This is not typically an ideal situation. You usually want to keep your physical switches as much as possible, but in this case, I only have one light switch and a couple of different ways to get into the kitchen. And based on the current setup, that light switch is a little bit hidden. So to make things a little more usable, I'm going to replace all of it with an automation. Plus, it allows me to divide the kitchen area up into 4 separate areas instead of one big area. I'll have the bar, the main kitchen area, a light over the fridge, and the lights in the breakfast nook, which we're currently using as a makeshift pantry until we get things a little more organized. The first step was to remove the old canned lights and swap them with these new Lumary lights. If you haven't replaced your canned lights before, it's pretty easy. Depending on your version, it may be a bit different. For me, I just had to remove the bulb, lower the shroud thingy, and then remove the socket from the shroud. After that, I could simply screw in the Lumary light, push the socket back up into the can, and then put the light into place. I had planned on doing them one at a time. Swap the light, then power them on, and then add them via the Tuya app. But then I decided just to replace all of them and power them on. This turned out not to be the best idea, but we'll talk about that in a bit. As soon as they do power on though, the Tuya app sees them and adding them was super easy. While I work through swapping these lights out, let's talk a little bit about them. First, when doing anything like this, be sure to turn off the power to keep things safe. One of the nice features of these lights is Lumary provided an easy wire connector between the socket connector and the actual light, so that you could disconnect the light from the socket, which made it a lot easier to screw them in. The lights that I'm using here are the 6-inch version and they fit snug without any adjustments. But they're also really lightweight, so it wouldn't take much to hold them up there. Lumary does have an app, and it appears to contain all of the same controls as the Tuya app. If you're running an Amazon or a Google-based smart home, you can just stick with the Lumary app. Each of those platforms has a Lumary skill that allows you to connect these lights to those platforms. Since I'm running Home Assistant though, I'm using the Tuya app so that I could easily include these in Home Assistant which is why I went that route. And when I finally got all of them swapped out, it was time to turn the power back on. And once powered on, they all popped up in the DIY-er app at the same time. The cool thing was I could just say add them all. The bad thing was it added them one at a time, and it took so long that they started to time out, which meant I had to cycle the power a couple of times to get them all added. But once they were, I renamed them based on the areas I was creating. But man, look at these lights. They are way brighter than what was here in this space before, and they look really good. There are a couple of ways we can add these lights to Home Assistant. First, there is of course the official DIY-er integration. This integration connects to the DIY-er cloud, and while it does require some extra steps, it is well documented over on the home-assistant.io webpage. It provides a pretty easy way to add DIY-er devices to Home Assistant, because once set up, any device you add to the DIY-er app will just show up in Home Assistant and be ready to use. It does require an internet connection to communicate with your devices, which some of you might be opposed to. So there's always the second option. Since these lights are DIY-er based, they are really good for us Home Assistant fans, because once you've got them set up in the DIY-er app, you could set up local DIY-er in Home Assistant for each one of these lights. The lights do still require the cloud to set them up initially, but once you've got them set up, you can transfer everything over to local DIY-er and keep the communication between the lights and Home Assistant on your local network, which means if your internet goes out for some reason, you still can control these lights. And from my testing so far, these lights work really well with local DIY-er, and they're super easy to set up. I did a whole video walking through how to use local DIY-er and these DIY-er devices, but since we're here, we're going to walk through setting up one of these LED lights from Lumary using the local DIY-er integration. Like I said, you'll need the cloud to get you started with local DIY-er, and that's because we need the device ID and the local key from the DIY-er API. So once you have your Lumary Lights added to the DIY-er app, head over to iot.DIY-er.com. If you haven't used the local DIY-er integration before, check the links in the description for my previous local DIY-er video where I discuss setting up a cloud project and linking the DIY-er API with your DIY-er devices. Once logged in, we're going to head to Development and then choose the project we've set up. If you've previously linked this project to the DIY-er app, you should be able to click on Devices and see all of the same devices you have in your DIY-er app. If you don't see your devices, you may need to change your project's data center or link the DIY-er app. As you can see, all of my Lumary lights I've set up are here. The device key will help us identify the device in the local DIY-er integration in Home Assistant. But we'll also need to get the local key, which is like a password used to connect the device on the local network. To get that local key, we're going to grab this device ID. First, I'm going to jump back over to Home Assistant and head to Integrations and then click Add. Then I'll search for local DIY-er. Again, if you don't see the local DIY-er in your list, check that link in the description for the previous video. In the drop-down, when you add the local DIY-er integration, you'll get a list of all your device IDs. If you know the IP, you can use that to find your device. Since we know the device ID of this device, I'll just select the one I want to add. Now we can give the device a name. I usually just try to match what I put in the DIY-er app just to make it easy for me when I'm switching between the apps during any troubleshooting. After that, we'll need that local key. So head back over to iot.DIY-er.com. We're going to copy that device ID and then head to Cloud and API Explorer. Here we're going to head to Device Management and choose Get Device Details. Then paste in that device ID and hit Submit Request down at the bottom. In the results, you should get a whole bunch of information including that local key. So we're going to copy the local key and then let's head back into Home Assistant. On this screen, we'll paste in that local key and hit Submit. Since this device is a light, we're going to choose Light in the drop-down and then we're going to hit Submit. Now we can set up the details of this device. We're going to type in a friendly name, and for color temperature, pick 23. For color, pick 24. And I went ahead and checked music mode available, even though I'll probably never use it. Oh, and for brightness, set that to 22. Then hit Submit. leave the Do Not Add Any More Entities checked and hit Submit again. If you want to, set the area for this device, but when you're all done, hit Finish. And now we have this light set up with Local Tuya. If you turn it on, you'll see we can control the brightness and the color. And we could set the mode to music, although I don't know if that actually works. But from this point on, if you use this specific entity, Home Assistant will send commands over the local network to this device, and won't be using the Tuya Cloud to control this device. After that, you just have to go through and repeat those steps for each one of those Lumary lights you've added. First thing I wanted to do was create some light groups. This allows me to easily automate each one of these sections that I'm creating using a single entity instead of having to run an action on individual lights. This is the perfect use case for a light group. You can set that up in the Helpers panel in Settings. Just click Add, then choose Group, then Light Group. After that, you just select your entities you want to include in this light group. I created a group called Bar Lights, Kitchen Lights, and Pantry Lights. I left the light over the fridge as its own so in the future I could automate it as a single entity. The control of these lights is going to be based on the occupancy, and for that I'm using Aqara motion sensors. I put a motion sensor in my 3 areas, at the wet bar, in the center of the kitchen, and one in the area that we're using as our temporary pantry/storeroom. Then I started building my automations. While we could have built one single automation and just used the choose action, I made one for each area. But they all follow the same pattern, so we'll just walk through one of them. I'll provide a link to the YAML these created just in case you want to take a closer look or in case you want to copy it to save you some work. Each of these automations will handle both turning on and turning off the lights, so I just gave them generic names like kitchen lights. The mode for these automations will be Restart. If you're not familiar with the automation modes, they tell Home Assistant what to do if an automation gets triggered while it's already running. In this case, we want it to restart, which will make sense in a bit. Each of these automations have 2 triggers, one to handle when to turn the lights on and one to handle when the lights should turn off. For the first trigger, we're going to simply watch for when the state of our motion sensor in the kitchen goes from off to on. Make sure you write these states in lowercase or this automation isn't going to work. Home Assistant is case sensitive, so always pay attention to the case. Because we'll be using the choose action, we want to provide a trigger ID to make it easier. Since this trigger should be when the lights turn on, I set the ID to Light Needed. If you don't see trigger ID in your list of attributes for your automations, simply come up to these 3 dots and click Edit Trigger ID, which will then add that attribute to the UI. The second trigger will be watching that same motion sensor, but this time we want to know when the state goes from on to off, and we want to include a For attribute because we don't want this to actually trigger until that motion sensor has been in the off state for at least 10 minutes. So we'll set that time to 10 minutes. This is where that restart mode comes in handy, because as soon as that motion sensor goes from on to off, a timer starts. So, if the state of the motion sensor changes during that time, we want this automation to restart that timer. If the mode stayed in the default single mode, then once this automation was triggered, it's going to run until it's done. Meaning, if you stopped moving long enough for the state of that motion sensor to go from on to off, this automation would trigger. And if you started dancing again, it wouldn't matter. The lights are going to turn off after 10 minutes unless you manually stop the automation, which is why we include that restart mode. Anyway, for trigger ID, we want to make it Light Not Needed, and then we can jump down to the action. To make the action section easier, I'm going to use scenes. I'm going to show you in a bit how to set those up, but for now, let's just build out our action section. We're going to use the choose action since we have 2 different triggers. For the first option, the condition type will be state, and the entity will be our light group kitchen lights, and we want to know if the state is off. This condition isn't needed, But since we're using the restart mode, technically the light needed action is going to fire every time that motion sensor goes from off to on. So if the light is already on, we might as well just stop this automation, which is what this condition will do. Then add another condition, type trigger by, and for trigger, choose light needed. If you don't see your trigger ID in this dropdown, it's because you forgot to add it to the trigger section above. Just go back, add it, and when you come back down here, it will be there. Then for action, under this option, we'll use call service. And the service we're going to be using is scene turn on, or scene activate. And we'll choose our kitchen normal scene. Your scene won't show up here until it's built, and again, we're going to talk about that in just a moment, but I've already built them out, so that's why it's here. Next, we need to add a second option for handling turning off the lights. The condition will be trigger by, and this time we're going to choose light not needed as the trigger we want to use. Then under action, we're going to call service, and again, we're going to use that scene turn on service. And for the entity, we're going to choose kitchen dark. After that, I repeated all of those same steps for each of the areas I wanted to set up. So let's talk about scenes for a bit. I typically use scenes for lighting situations, especially when I have a group of lights and I want them all to be specific color and brightness. And since multiple automations could act on those lights to turn them on and off, I think scenes make an easy way to abstract all of those details into a separate function that if I decide I want to change it, I just have to modify one scene instead of a whole bunch of automations. To create a scene, just put all of the lights you want to use in whatever configuration you want. In this case, I turned on my kitchen light group and set the color and brightness. Then I head over to Settings, Automations, and Scenes, and click Scenes. To add one, just click Add Scene. Give it a name, like in this case, Kitchen Normal. And for light groups, add an entity. I picked my kitchen lights, and since I also have a fridge light that I want to be part of this, I add a device as well, which Home Assistant is smart enough to figure out if you try to add a device under Entity. Then I turn off that kitchen light group and repeat the same process, creating a scene for Kitchen Dark. Super easy to set these scenes up. Once I've got scenes for my normal lighting and for turning all the lights off, which I call my dark scenes, now when we enter any of those areas, the lights will come on, and if motion stops for 10 minutes, they'll go off. And I think the automation will work well enough that no one's going to care about the light switch. Since all of the lights I'm using in this video are Wi-Fi based, if someone does in fact turn that light switch off, all it means is that Home Assistant won't be able to control them. In the future, I may replace that lone light switch with a smart switch and make sure I have an automation that if it ever gets turned off, simply turn it back on. And I plan on building an automation specific to the light over the fridge, so when we enter the kitchen at nighttime, it'll be the only light that comes on. I haven't quite got that set up yet because I was more focused on making sure that I could get the lights to work in the kitchen without having to worry about a light switch. So for now, I think this will do. Anyway, that's it for this video. We've covered a lot, but hopefully this video showed you how easy it is to use these Lumary lights with your Home Assistant-based smart home. Another big thanks to Lumary for sending these lights to me. They are pretty good, and they're easy to set up, and they work well with Home Assistant, especially since we can use that local TIA integration. Plus, they've helped make the lighting in my kitchen a little more user-friendly, especially for any guests that stop by. And I think that might be the #1 rule of Smart Home Club. If you want to grab some of these lights for your smart home, I'll leave an affiliate link in the description. A 4-pack of these lights like I used in this video will cost around $90 on Amazon, but you can also purchase them as a single light. And over on Lumary's site, they have quite a few other options for lighting. So if you're looking for some smart TIA-based lighting, check out their website. I mean, these ceiling lights look pretty cool, and I think I might have a use case for them down in my theater. So you might see more Lumary products on the channel in the future. If you want to support SlackerLabs and the mission to help you automate the boring stuff, you can find an official link to the SlackerLabs t-shirt store, as well as affiliate links and even a link to buy me a coffee if you so choose in the description of this video. Or simply let me know that you found value in this video by hitting that like button. And consider subscribing to my channel if you haven't already for more smart home content like this. As always, thanks for taking time out of your home automation projects to watch mine. Until next time, go automate the boring stuff.